Greetings, Imagination Con. The Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Hey, my name is King. If you don't know who I am, my name is Israel King. I'm a writer, director, and anime commentator on my main channel, King Tannic. Now, if you've been a fan of pop culture for any amount of time, then you surely must have noticed the sudden rise in popularity in anime and manga. Films breaking box office records, series topping the most pirated show of the year chart, and of course, the very apparent fan base that has surrounded it. According to a poll back in February of this year, about 50% of Gen Z watches anime. Now, if you're not Gen Z, it can be kind of hard not knowing anything about this new, sudden, very popular corner in the pop culture zeitgeist. And that's where we come in. King Tannic and the Network have partnered to bring you the best anime and manga related news show on YouTube. The Otaku Experience is your go-to place to find out the biggest stories of the week in the anime and manga industry. Still not convinced? Try the show out for yourself. The show airs Thursdays at 2 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time or 5 p.m. Eastern. The Otaku Experience, only on the Network.
Robservations with Robert My Burnett.
Well, greetings, Imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the as yet, perhaps never, defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, it's me. It's Robert Meyer Burnett. I'm Robcasting at you from a very hot Robservatory. Even though it's air-conditioned in here, you can probably hear the hiss of that air conditioner. It's still damn hot. It's hot. As they said in Biloxi Blues, it's Africa hot. It's that hot. Although I bet it's probably hotter here. But anyway, greetings, everyone, on this post-Comicon Tuesday. I had a great time at Comicon. I wasn't there. Usually I'd stay there 5 days. I didn't stay there 5 days. I was going back and forth this time because I had work to do. But it was a lot of fun. Very chill. Got to see a lot of people. You know, a new thing about Comicon that I really love is running into other YouTubers in the wild. I met people like that Star Wars girl. I'd never met her. Of course, Chris Gore was there. Saw a lot of other people. It's always fun to meet YouTubers in the wild because I have to tell you, we're an amiable bunch. You know, it's one thing, we might have our beefs online, but you guys get a bunch of YouTubers together and it's all smiles and hugs. And oh my God, it's all like, we're colleagues. So I do like that. That's something new that happens at Comic-Con that didn't used to happen, but it's new. I always enjoy it. It's always welcome. And, YouTubers, when they get together, are a happy bunch of folks. So that was a lot of fun. Great to see people. Love to see other YouTubers. Of course, then the inevitable blowback appears where someone's like, oh, Rob's gone over to the Fandom Menace. Uh-oh, you retweeted Ethan Van Sciver today. Does that mean? It's like, hey, man, Ethan Van Sciver liked Barbie. I was like, you go, Ethan. He had actually some great salient points to make. And I thought that was pretty good. And the thing is, I like all my YouTube brethren out there, brothers and sisters, and people that are non-binary who are not quite specific. I like you all. I like the work you guys do. I like the fact that we're out there putting our opinions out for all to hear. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially doing it for a while. So always good to see you. Shout out to all my fellow YouTubers, no matter who or what you may be or what you believe or what you have to say. Keep fighting the good fight. Keep getting out there and sharing your opinions, because you know what? Every person you meet has a story to tell. All you have to do is listen. That you haven't heard, by the way. So anyway, another thing that's happened today, of course, the trailer for the Blumhouse the first part of the Blumhouse $400 million Exorcist trilogy dropped Exorcist or The Exorcist Believer. Everyone's like, Rob, what'd you think? Here's the thing. The Exorcist is my favorite horror film of all time. And there's a lot of reasons why I love it. I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a particularly religious person, but I really enjoy religion, all different kinds of religions. I was raised in a Jewish family, loved Judaism, but one of my best friends growing up was Catholic, so I went to church with him. Human belief systems fascinate me. And you have to have some interest in religion if you love horror movies, because vampire mythology is informed by Catholicism. Even Judaism has a lot of great stuff. If you look up Yiddish folk tales and things like the Lamed Vav and the Yeni Welt, the Mirror Realm, Asmodeus, Lilith, there's all kinds of great stuff to love in there. And all the religions of the world have many freaky tales to delve into. And why is The Exorcist my favorite horror movie? People have asked me that. Do I think it's scary? It depends who you are. There are a lot of people that The Exorcist doesn't work for at all. I've always wanted to be Catholic, so The Exorcist would work better on me. But one of the things that I enjoy about The Exorcist is its style. It comes out of William Friedkin was a documentary filmmaker that brought his documentary style. A lot of people talk about the documentary style of the early filmmakers, but I think where documentary style worked best, 2 genre films, nothing has ever come close to either one of them. One is The Exorcist, and what's the next one? Came out only a year later. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, Tobe Hooper's original. Those 2 films transcend. There is a believability in those movies that is incredibly difficult to duplicate. They do not rely on lighting, on music, on all the traditional things that the pyrotechnics of visual effects, even though The Exorcist has incredible makeup effects by Dick Smith and his crew. Both of those movies create an entirely convincing reality that allows the horror to be even more horrific because it feels so viscerally real. And obviously there's been Exorcist II: The Heretic, Exorcist III. There's been Paul Schrader and Rennie Harlin's Exorcist IVs. There was the Exorcist TV series, of which the first season I actually really liked. And while I don't think Exorcist III comes close to Exorcist I, I really very much like Exorcist III, and I think it has one of the greatest screenplays ever written for a horror film. Obviously because William Peter Blatty wrote and directed the movie himself, and the mastermind behind The Exorcist in the first place. The Exorcist III is much more of a movie. Well, so The Exorcist, and what I also love about The Exorcist is there's no explanation for Regan McNeil's possession. You can say, it was to bring Father Merrin out, but within the context of that movie, and the way that, I'll tell you, the first time I saw that film was when I turned 13. And for my bar mitzvah, I was the first kid on my block to have a VCR because my grandfather had a furniture store that had an electronics department, so he was able to get me a RCA VFT 625 VHS player. Well, VCR, videotape recorder, or video cassette recorder, videotape recorder. And I was the first kid on my block to have one, and I was getting movies and showing them to neighborhood kids at 13. Wholly inappropriate films, I might add. So when I saw The Exorcist, it was one of the first films that I was able to get. I went and got 5 movies. That was one of them. Alice, Sweet Alice was another. That was on Allied Artists Home Video. So when I watched The Exorcist for the very first time, I just turned 13, and it was midnight. I saved it to watch it at midnight. If you remember The Exorcist, it opens with a sequence in Iraq when we meet Father Merrin. We meet Max von Sydow's Father Merrin, and he's on an archaeological dig. I couldn't get past Iraq. When he's standing in front of what we now know as Pazuzu, and you see the sound design, the tone of it, when I was 13 years old, that relentlessly realistic tone to me was so unsettling, and nothing really even happens. I mean, there's a couple of things. A clock stops, dogs fight. I was terrified. I was terrified, but I was terrified more in an existential way. I didn't even know why I was terrified. It just felt like something, just the tone of it scared the shit out of me. And that's why I loved it. So the next day I came back and I watched it like at noon. I was like, okay. And it still terrified me. Nowadays, I know a lot of people, I mean, you have to have a certain, I think, mindset for it to scare you the way it scared me. I don't know if it's even possible for people today. I mean, truth be told, one of my favorite things to do is watch like teenage girls do response videos to The Exorcist. Because, or not just teenage girls, but anybody, even guys who are younger, in their teens, 20s, watching The Exorcist for the first time, because they're not prepared for it. And it's interesting because people stick with it because it's The Exorcist. But I think that watching it work its magic, I mean, it's really interesting to watch people who are so accustomed to seeing something else. I mean, horror is so ingrained now, but a certain kind of horror, true existential dread. And The Exorcist, of course, is so blasphemous, and it crosses lines that people are not used to today. Because even though we have a lot of horror films, for the most part, they're pretty chaste. And they don't go as far as the original Exorcist does, and they're not as disturbing. And it's really interesting to me watching people rediscover The Exorcist. And it is, after all, it's 50 years old this year. So the fact that it has... Anyway, that said, that's a long preamble. What did I think of Exorcist Believer? It's fine. It looks like what I would call a movie. There's been so many possession films over the last 20 years. I saw nothing new. First of all, it's shot like a movie. It looks like a movie. It looks like a very generic... And I wasn't a big fan of the director's three Halloween movies. I'm happy they made money, and I'm happy people like them. But, I grew up... The very first videotape I ever owned was John Carpenter's Halloween. I've seen that movie like 100 times. And all the sequels and everything. But when I went and saw Mr. Green... Is it Green? Glenn... Glenn Gordon. I thought it was just ordinary. It was generic, and this movie looked to me like generic possession. And it did things like, these two girls were out in the woods. Like, were they abducted by a satanic cult? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a whole part of that in there. But see, the problem with all of that is it's distancing. You're an audience watching a movie. When I first watched The Exorcist, it felt like it was a documentary that Friedkin had gone with Owen Roizman. They'd gone around his DP. They'd gone around the world and filmed this shit really happening. And the faces back in those movies. Jason Miller and Ellen Burstyn. I know they bring back Chris McNeil, but even that, it's like Chris McNeil's coming back. A character that felt real to me is now in movie world. And I'm glad I'm glad they went back and got her. But I don't even know if it's possible to make a movie like The Exorcist today. I honestly don't know. Because it's a full-blown fantasy film, horror fantasy. But because of the way it was made, it felt, to me, absolutely real. And it's dealing with I mean, what is The Exorcist really about? It's about a Catholic priest who loses his faith in God. He wasn't there when his mother died. He's racked with guilt. And he's having a crisis of faith. And in confronting what is apparently the devil himself, I mean, it didn't become Pazuzu till later, he finds his faith and is able to save the soul of an innocent. So the story is very resonant on a number of levels. So did I want to see... Do I want to see it? Look, I'll go see it, but I'm sure after the first 10 minutes we can all know how it's going to go, even though it's part of a trilogy. I mean, it looks fine, but we've seen it all, and I mean, I think it's interesting that two girls are possessed, and of course they've got a little politicking going on there, which is fine. It doesn't bother me. Apparently, the father, a black lead in the movie, his wife died in an earthquake in Haiti. I think you see a clip of that in the trailer, and he's a single father. That's interesting to me because there's a lot of stuff. But again, it just looks like movie. It's we're in possession movie land, and we've seen so much of it. And by the way, The Exorcist is no one's ever even come close to the film on the way it works. So it looks fine. I mean, I'm sure it'll be competently made, and I don't know if it's worth $400 million that they paid for or whatever, but hey, I want it to be good. I want everything to be good. Please be good. I just don't think it's going to go down. It's not going to be any kind of a horror classic. I'd love to be proven wrong. So, there you go. Now, people keep asking me to opine on the state of the strikes, the writers' strike and SAG-AFTRA. And it was interesting because I'm not an actor. I've never been part of the Writers Guild, although they did give me an award. But it's hard. Like, as a creative and as a producer, I know how hard it is to eke out a meager living working, especially in the independent film world, the way I've kind of lived. So I'm sympathetic to everyone that's on strike. But it's sort of interesting. I watched Sean Gunn, and I like Sean Gunn. I was able to work with Sean and James Gunn 20 years ago on a movie called The Specials. And Sean Gunn's actually a really talented actor. I think one day he's going to get his defining role, but I think he's an untapped resource. I mean, obviously his brother knows about him, but I think Sean Gunn is a really good actor that I think can add a lot. One day he's going to get a signature role and really break out. People are going to be like, Sean Gunn's new to the scene. You're going to be like, bruh, he's been making movies for 20 years, 25 years. But anyway, so Sean Gunn said something really interesting. He's been talking a lot about how the Gilmore Girls that he was in for quite a while moved over, has been on Netflix and making a lot of money for Netflix, and he hasn't seen a penny of it. And why I thought that was interesting is because Netflix isn't supposed to pay Sean Gunn anything, because Netflix didn't make the Gilmore Girls. So I figured I wanted to start and talk a little bit about how Hollywood works in the age of streamers. So I've often said to people, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. In terms of Hollywood, you get what you negotiate. And when you're an actor hired to be on a TV show, you know exactly how much you're getting. On the Gilmore Girls was produced by a few production companies, but it was a Warner Brothers production, Warner Brothers Studios. So the production companies own it, and also Warner Brothers owns it. When you make a deal to sign on to a TV show for any length of time, your contract spells out exactly what you're supposed to get. Exactly. You know what you would get. Just about every contingency is there in that contract. Now, over the last 25 years, studios have been playing fast and loose with their shows, sometimes dealing to themselves, like putting Chris Carter famously sued Fox over the X-Files because they took the X-Files and put it on their own network. So they're like, here's something which you're not getting top dollar for. So there's a lot of shenanigans that go on in this world. But actors know for the most part what they're supposed to get. It's in their contracts. Now what's really interesting is Netflix made a licensing agreement with Warner Brothers to put the Gilmore Girls on Netflix. So if you're an actor that's supposed to get residuals, it's up to the production company that owns the show to keep track of the residuals that you're supposed to get and pay them out accordingly. Well, one of the things that has gone a little wonky with TV shows in our streaming world is most of the time, if a TV show was going to get sold, it gets sold around the world. It gets sold, but territory by territory. You'd sell it to France, you'd sell it to Germany, you'd sell it to England, the UK, you'd sell it to Spain. And each one of those countries is a different territory. And each one of those countries pays a certain amount for the show. And then that's how residuals were also paid out, in addition to commercials, and every time the episode airs, you get residuals, and you get residuals from selling a show overseas. And it usually takes between 4 and 5 seasons for a lot of money to kick in. Once a show, because television shows are made at a deficit to start with, and many shows don't even become successful. So studios, they're not just making money off every TV show. So every TV show is not a hit. But if a show lasts 4 or 5 seasons, that's when real money starts to kick in. And that's when people, the producers of the show, the executive producers of the show, the actors, start to make some real money. I've actually personally held a check in my hand, a residual check, I guess you could call it a residual check, for $3 million. I won't say where I was holding this check. It was in someone's kitchen. And they said to me, "Oh yeah, I gotta give that to my accountant." But it was for a certain particular show, and it was whatever payment they were due. The person made a lot of money off that show, tens of millions of dollars. So there's a lot of money to be made if you've negotiated the proper deal and if you're high enough on the pecking order to get that kind of money. But so Sean Gunn's talking about how Netflix is making a lot of money off the Gilmore Girls. Well, Netflix had to pay a lot of money to get the Gilmore Girls. So whether they're making money on the Gilmore Girls, because we all know that Netflix, they're not selling computers and they're not shipping things to people. All Netflix has, I know they have their new ad tiers and things like that, but for the most part, Netflix was a subscription-only company. So that's all the money they get. Now, I guess in the last quarter they made $1.5 billion in profit or something. Good for them. But the thing is, they have to pay for all their shows. They have to pay for all their licenses. So what happens is when they want to put the Gilmore Girls on TV, on Netflix, they're paying a certain amount of money to the production company that is then supposed to distribute that money out to the actors, depending on the deals the actors made. So Netflix doesn't owe the actors anything, depending on the kinds of deals the production company does. Now, I want to read you something just to talk a little bit about this. So, back in, let's see, where was it? Here we go. This is 2019. This is an article in the New York Times. So, when HBO Max was announced, or just HBO, when AT&T took over, they were going to pull Friends off of every other streaming service and put it on their own. But Netflix offered them $100 million to keep Friends on. Keep in mind, Friends was already made. Friends was already paid for. It was done in its run. So normally you keep selling those shows into strip syndication or sell them internationally or wherever you're going to sell them and make your money that way. But to get $100 million payday, that's what Netflix paid to keep Friends for 1 year. Let's read this. This is from 2018, December of 2018. New York Times by Edmund Lee, this article. Are Netflix and Friends on a break? The answer is no. For now, reruns of Joey's thespian trials, Chandler's hapless sarcasm, Monica's compulsive cleanliness, Phoebe's feline riffs, and the seemingly permanent courtship of Ross and Rachel will be available to watch on Netflix for at least another year, the streaming service has announced. But it will come at a steep price. The company will pay around $100 million to continue licensing the program from its owner, Warner Media. According to 2 people with direct knowledge of the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the details of the deal. That's a significant jump from the $30 million a year that Netflix had paid previously to stream the show. But the new amount reflects the thirst for content in the streaming age. Online viewing is the future of entertainment, and the industry's biggest players, including Warner Media's parent AT&T, now it's no longer the case, Discovery is, the Walt Disney Company, Comcast, NBC Universal. Remember, this is from 2018. It's actually 4 years ago. End of 2018. Viacom, CBS, and Discovery are retooling their streaming operations to take on services like Netflix and Amazon. Warner Media and Netflix declined to comment. For Netflix, paying big money for hit content is necessary to its expanding customer base, now 57 million in the United States and 130 million worldwide. It's doubled that now, I think. Maybe not 260, but close. Questions about the show's future on the service began over the weekend when customers spotted a notice on Netflix's Friends page that read, availability until 1/1/19. Some of the show's fans turned apoplectic. The only reason I have an account with Netflix is to rewatch Friends, Haley Kiyoko posted on Twitter. Why, Netflix, are you hurting us? The Netflix account responded, I would never hurt you, Haley. At an investor conference in New York on Monday, Ted Sarandos, head of Netflix's content division, said the show's departure is a rumor. Later, the company officially announced the show would remain on the service. The holiday armadillo has granted your wish. Friends will still be there for you in the U.S. throughout 2019, Netflix posted in a tweet, which included an image of the character Ross in an armadillo suit from a scene in which he tries to explain the story of Hanukkah to his son. The deal to keep Friends on Netflix was due to expire by the end of the year, but both Netflix and AT&T had been negotiating for at least a few months to extend it, the people with direct knowledge of the matter said. Complicating the negotiation was AT&T's plan to begin a streaming service of its own by the end of 2019. AT&T acquired Time Warner in June for $85.4 billion, landing prized assets such as HBO, CNN, and the Warner Brothers Film and TV studio, which include shows like Friends, Big Bang Theory, and blockbuster movies like Wonder Woman. That's content we definitely want on our platform, AT&T's chief executive Randall Stevenson said of Friends at an investor conference on Tuesday, and it's clearly important to Netflix as well. He added that the new agreement between the two is non-exclusive for $100 million, meaning Friends is likely to appear on AT&T's coming service by 2020. The sides are currently negotiating rates for after 2019 that would be significantly lower than $100 million, since the show would no longer stream exclusively on Netflix, the people with knowledge of the matter said. It's also possible that Friends could leave Netflix after next year, they added. To attract new streaming customers, AT&T will likely have to keep some of its shows and films off other services like Netflix and have them available only on AT&T's offering. Disney, which plans to debut its own streaming service by the end of next year, will start pulling some of its films. At AT&T's analyst conference last month, John Stankey, the executive put in charge of Warner Media, said streaming players like Netflix were going to see a pretty substantial structural shift in the availability of content over the next 18 to 24 months. Companies like Netflix should expect their libraries are going to get a lot thinner, he said. And that's going to make it exciting for us, said Netflix chief executive Reed Hastings. So remember, this is 4 years ago. Now let's jump over to this. This is an article that was in Forbes, and this article was on December 5th. So this was before. Why paying $100 million for Friends might still be a bargain for Netflix. News that Netflix will pay Warner Media $100 million to keep showing Friends for another year set tongues wagging in the streaming video world, but it actually may be a very good deal for the streamer as it transitions away from reliance on licensed fare from traditional Hollywood. Friends, one of TV history's most successful series, as both a first-run show and through a lucrative international syndication afterlife, which is what happens with a show like Gilmore Girls as well, has enjoyed a resurgence on Netflix from both fans old and new. Many of them millennials or younger who can't be bothered to watch TV the old-fashioned way. Those Netflix devotees have been working their way through Friends' mammoth 236-episode catalog, and now friends on social media share Friends moments in a way that just wasn't possible back when Ross and Rachel were first in permanent mutual circling mode. On Facebook alone, the official Friends show page has more than 20 million likes. The show's living room, couch, and coffeehouse set are even a central attraction on the pricey tour of the Warner Brothers studio lot in Burbank and still generate plenty of licensed merchandise sale, too. Netflix doesn't make available data on how many people now stream Friends, but after a year the show first arrived on Netflix in 2015, New York Magazine speculated that the show might still be the most popular on TV more than a decade after it left the air. So all that said, even by Netflix's own standards, paying $100 million for a year of Friends binging could still be a very good deal, even if it's more than 3 times the previous price. In part, that's because $100 million doesn't go very far in Hollywood these days. Back when Netflix was still an up-and-comer handing out What the studios considered found money for their old shows, it commissioned Beau Willimon and David Fincher to adapt a relatively obscure British series as one of its first original shows. The result, House of Cards, starring Kevin Spacey and Robin Wright, won 7 Emmys and real street cred for Netflix at a time when it was mostly a place for reruns and old movies. Now here's the thing. When Netflix makes their shows, they have to make shows under the auspices of guild rules because they're paying for it. They're paying, so they have to pay DGA, they have to pay SAG rates. The difference is that there is no ad revenue. When Netflix makes a show, it's owned by Netflix. There is no, it's not going into strip syndication, it's not going into reruns, so it's not generating more money. Because a TV show that Netflix makes, a streaming show, all it does is share, like when you pay your, whatever you're paying, whatever ad, say you're paying $15 a month for Netflix, well, your subscription, that's got to be used for everything that's on Netflix. All of it. So whatever everybody pays for their subscription, that covers everything you watch. That's every foreign TV show you watch. That's every documentary. Whatever Netflix is spending for programming, it all comes from your subscription. Now, the question I would say to Sean Gunn is, when you look at something like Gilmore Girls, which Netflix didn't make, what's Netflix supposed to pay you for that? How much of everybody's subscription goes to Gilmore Girls? Now, the answer would be like, well, if you get 1 billion streams of Gilmore Girls, then it's worth a certain amount of money. But is it? Because Netflix is only making as much as they make on a streamer, whatever your subscription that you're paying for. That's their only income. Now, obviously, they're implementing ad tiers where people, but again, all of that money, I mean, you can say that it goes to individual shows and you can suddenly have a record of how much you're bringing in, but it's still all going into one place. And the question is, and one of the reasons the Writers Guild and SAG are fighting, is there are no residuals for these shows. No one's getting paid out. I mean, Warner Brothers, if they get paid for Friends $100 million, whoever negotiated an ownership position in Friends gets paid out some money. And I'm sure they get residuals as well. But, you know, when you get residuals on a show that's 25 years old, you might get a residual for 25 cents. Who knows? Depending on what your deal is, it's hard to say. But the days when network shows were on networks and they had ad revenue and then you sold them into syndication all around the world, all of that was quantifiable and you could find out exactly what something was making because that was all part of the deal. There had to be transparency. With streaming, it's not like that. And so when you have a streamer like a Netflix that licenses the Gilmore Girls, the only money that's being paid out is by Warner Brothers. Whatever they got for their licensing deal and whatever you negotiated, you get what's coming to you. Now, this is new. I mean, television was the way it was for a long time, for over half century. But over the last 15 years, as streamers came into being, everything has changed. And there's a lot less money to go around because there's a lot more stuff being made. And it needs to be made cheaper and quicker, even though things are more expensive. The whole industry paradigm is completely different. And so when Sean Gunn was being upset saying Netflix is making a lot of money, I don't think they are. Netflix has paid out a lot of money. Now, if they make a Stranger Things and it becomes a gigantic hit and you've got however many streams, we'll see. Who knows what shows are going to be successful on Netflix? And if they have a breakout hit in something like Squid Game, well, what would that do to, say, the Gilmore Girls that they paid a licensing fee for? How is Netflix supposed to pay out? Now, I'm not arguing here for the streamers. I'm just saying that the economic model is totally wonky compared to the way it used to be. It's totally different. And a company like Netflix, and that's where a lot of the sticking points are, is at Netflix, because they're like, we don't fit in the old paradigm at all. Not really. And if we're licensing a show like Friends, they don't do that anymore. But if we're licensing Gilmore Girls, you got to take whatever you can get out of that money and talk to your production company. Now, if you're working for Netflix themselves, well, that's a whole different issue. You know, they're going to pay you. What are they going to pay you up front? Since there is no other revenue stream from Netflix, you basically get paid once. That's what you get paid. Now, what the actors want is they want, if a show becomes successful, they want to share in that success. If I'm on your show, and they're not wrong, you know, but I would say this. If you already have 200 million subscribers, 200 million households that you subscribe to, that subscribe to Netflix, now you might be on the most successful show that Netflix has, and it might have 1 billion streams, but Netflix still has to, and you might be able to say like, oh, okay, well, is it new subscribers watching Stranger Things? Or is it all the people that already subscribe to Netflix? And how do you pay for that? You know, how would they be expected to pay for that? And to be honest, as a producer myself, I don't know how they could. Because they might have a breakout hit and you could maybe say, okay, this drove so many subscriptions, but people are churning. There's a lot of churn. People pay for something, they watch everything they want to watch, then they leave and they come back a year later. So the economic models that existed in order to pay things like residuals out have been completely blown up. There are still things, don't get me wrong, there are still network shows that get sold around that have ad tiers, ad revenue. And not ad tiers, they have ad revenue they're generating through commercials, and they sell shows to foreign countries, and there's still ad revenue being generated there, but it's the streamers that people want a piece of. But the problem is, when Netflix is paying for everything and they're putting out as much stuff as they put out, how do you then say, okay, this money has to pay for all these shows? How are we supposed to, if just because we get one breakout hit, what about the 50 things that aren't a breakout hit? What about reality shows that never had residuals? How do they do that? Now, I don't know the answer to the question. I'm just saying that it's a very different world that we live in. And a lot of the streamers are in a world of hurt, because in order to compete with one another, they had to spend a bunch of money, not realizing that, well, where are we getting a return from? You know, they spent a lot of money, but there was no money coming back in. And now that both the writers and the actors are expecting to have a deal, you know, make a deal with the AMPTP, basically the producers and the studios, and they're like, with what money? You know? And yeah, you can see, again, Barbie made a lot of money this weekend, obviously, but remember, the studios only see half that. And then, you know, of if a movie costs $150 million to make, remember, studios have their overhead, they have their interest payments, they have the budget of the film, they have to pay for marketing. So a movie like Barbie, you know, they talk about it making 300 million worldwide, let's just say 400 million worldwide. A studio's only going to see 200 of that right away, and of that barely covers the production cost. It certainly doesn't cover the production cost of marketing. And then they have to pay for the studio overhead. They have to pay for... So there's a lot less money than people think there is to go around. But anyway, I just sort of wanted to address that because I've heard Sean Gunn. He was saying all that about Gilmore Girls, and I'm like, Netflix's job is not to pay you, man. You got to get that from Warner Brothers when they get that fat licensing fee, whatever Netflix paid for it. But I understand. Everyone thinks, well, if the show streams, it's driving subscriptions. But if 200 million people already have a subscription, and then you put Stranger Things on, would you base residuals only on the new subscriptions you're getting? And how can you prove that those new subscriptions are only for Stranger Things? You still have 200 million people that are households that are still watching already. And if everybody who has Netflix watches a hit show, which, let's face it, that's what happens. If everyone's talking about Squid Game or everyone's talking about Stranger Things, everybody who has Netflix is watching those shows. So that's why they have all those views. But Netflix paid for them. So Netflix owns them. And, you know, people agreed. It was in your contract. Here's what you're going to get. And like I said, it ain't show friends, it's show business. and you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And if you sign on for a Netflix show, and this is the real question, is the writers, it's a little different. The writers are people are expecting more work from the writers in less time, and the writers are not being able to do what they're supposed to be doing. They're getting shortchanged on a number of different levels. It's a little different than what we're talking about with the actors. But anyway, I just don't know how it all works itself out. I really don't, and I'm fascinated by it because these paradigm shifts have radically happened. And I'll give you an example. I became a picture editor in 1993. I've been editing for 30 years. In the 90s, I was working with a lot of first-time directors. I cut, I think, 5 first-time directors' movies you'd never even heard of. But it's still the work went on. Movies like The New Gods that Jim Boyd directed, or movies like Nebraska that Michael Nash directed. Worked many long hours on those movies, but I was the editor. I was also the post-production supervisor, so I was getting paid a certain amount for a fixed amount of time. But as computer technology got better, editors were also supposed to learn After Effects, and we're supposed to learn Photoshop, and we're supposed to learn how to do all these other things. Did we get paid more money for those skills? No. It was just, we were no longer just editing. We're now computer artists that we had to learn all kinds of different things, and we weren't getting paid more to do it. Depending on what you get, you could be a union editor, and the union was great because it would help you. You only had to work certain hours, and you'd get more money. But then you had to be working with people that, certainly my first-time directors were not union people. So, it was, I took the work where I could get it, and I was happy to do it. And I learned a lot, but it's a crazy business. So that's kind of what I was thinking. I got another article I want to share with you, but there's people that have been firing in. Culture Wars Diplomacy says, I don't know what the studios have to offer, but I hope they get something. I don't think they can be what they're asking. You might be right about that. I don't. It's hard to say. I think that the problem is right now everyone is so far apart, and I don't think there's a real understanding of where the business is at. So I think a lot of people are asking for things that they can't get because there's nothing to give them, if that makes any sense. Like, everyone's talking about Netflix. And I get it. I understand, because they've become a production company that's giving so many people work, and they're paying for so much stuff. But their business model, which is subscription only, yeah, they're introducing ad tiers, but for the most part, it's subscription only. That's all they get. So if they have a hit show, the only way they're going to get more money is if they get more subscriptions. But the people that are already watching Netflix, that's what makes their installed base, their installed subscriber base is what's making those shows hits. There's already 200 million people that are Netflix subscribers, 200 million households. So those are the people that are, as soon as a hit show comes on Netflix, and people binge it. But is Netflix making any more money because of it? That's the real question. And then could Netflix prove, and if they get a new subscription, that subscription isn't only for one show. I mean, it could be for one show, but they can't prove that. So what are they supposed to say? Okay, so Stranger Things has dropped. We had 200 million subscribers, and since Stranger Things Season 5 dropped, we now have 210 million subscribers. So 10 million new subscribers. Not insubstantial, but those 10 million new subscribers are money that Netflix has to pay, not just for one show. So how do you define, with an already installed base of over 200 million subscribers, how does anybody say even a hit show on Netflix is worth more money? Because they've already got those subscriptions. They can only say it's worth more money if you then say, well, you got new subscribers since people came on, but then other people leave. There's people that aren't interested in Stranger Things, or they're not interested in Squid Game. Who knows? And look at how much stuff Netflix drops. They have to pay for all of that. So where's this residual money? That's why when you work for Netflix, you got to get what you can, why you can, when you can, and get as much as up front, which is what I would imagine. Like the writers need more time. The writers need bigger writers' rooms. They need more time. The writers need to be able to go up and oversee the shooting of their scripts. They should, and it'll make the product better. But even then, it makes the product better, but how much better on a monetary basis? It's already so expensive to make all these things. They're going to cut corners whenever they can. The last thing anybody wants to hear about is artistic integrity. So if writers want more time in the writer's room, how do you explain that? Where's that money going to come from? On a subscription-only basis, it's not like they can have more money. They have to pay for all these other shows. That's one of the problems, too. So, which is tough. Let's see what I got here. There's Murray Ryke, 1 of 2, says, I saw Oppenheimer, and overall it was masterfully directed film by Christopher Nolan. Phenomenal acting, great editing, soundtrack, and character study. My biggest gripe of the film was the length. I personally felt they could have cut out at least 40 minutes of it. Perhaps, especially after the part where they dropped the bomb and then it kept going on and on. I think what soured part of the experience was the fact that they only had 17 minutes of trailers, which I was told there wouldn't be due to it being 3 hours long and it was IMAX. Well, I can understand that. You just have to go with it. I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, whenever I see a movie, if I think it's too long, I try and put myself in the filmmaker's perspective and say, well, what is it they were hoping to get to me? What do they want me to take away from this? And I think that, the character of Robert Oppenheimer was a compelling character and had an interesting life. And even after what he'd done, he's still, because of his proclivities and things like that, interesting stuff. Scott Bartholomew asks me to comment on this week's Strange New Worlds crossover episode with Lower Decks. Well, it aired. Now, here's the thing. Look, to me, Star Trek has gone, especially the season of Strange New Worlds, I don't see, it is a show, Strange New Worlds is a show that's actually, just like Lower Decks, it's only about Star Trek. It is no longer an allegorical action-adventure science fiction show. Almost everything about Star Trek Strange New Worlds is Star Trek commenting on itself. I honestly think Strange New Worlds is so far up its own ass that it has not done. Strange New Worlds hasn't told really an interesting story to me this season. It's been gimmicky. If Spock turned human, which we've seen, go back and watch This Side of Paradise in the first season of TOS. Far more poignant and deep than Strange New Worlds was. Watching a show where they're crossing over with their animated counterparts to the point where the characters of Strange New Worlds were animated at the end of that episode. That show has nothing to say to me. I don't know if it has anything to say to anybody. It's what's happened is it's become a weekly show. It's in a way it's almost like a sitcom. Strange New Worlds feels more like a sitcom to me than an allegorical science fiction action adventure show. Because everybody gets their sort of story. The episode before with Uhura was, like somebody said, a remake of Night Terrors. And at the end of the day, where is the new shows? We live in a really interesting time now, and Star Trek has always reflected the times we live in back at us, by telling us interesting stories that resonate with us in a science fiction context. I don't see any of that happening at all. What we're getting is a bunch of Star Trek tropes. And where are the stories? Where are the stories that leap beyond Star Trek? It's all about itself, which I think is weird. Literally, this episode of Those Old Scientists was about Star Trek. It's weird. it's weird to watch a show that's only about itself. Well, to say I dislike it is an understatement. Murray Ryke goes on to say, I'm glad I got to see it in probably the biggest IMAX 70mm screen in North America at AMC Lincoln Square in New York City, one of the best theaters in the United States or in the world. 76 feet wide and 6 or 7 stories high. Packed theater. Especially tickets for IMAX are sold out for weeks, and I got lucky. Should I see Barbie? I'd see Barbie. I have not seen Barbie, and I have not seen Oppenheimer yet. Because of I was going to go see Oppenheimer on Thursday, but we had a panel, so I didn't go. Yeah. Scott Bartholomew says, Rob, do you guys in the business write your own contracts, or is that what agents are for? That's what agents are for. Agents negotiate. If you have a good agent, they negotiate your contract. And look, the studios get you the studios write the contracts, and your agents negotiate the deal points in the contracts the studios give you. That's how it works. But yes, and a good agent, that's what you pay them for. William Nick Kerr says, will Barbie be the biggest movie of 2023 come December? Well, I don't know. I don't know. It really depends. I don't think industry pundits and power players are going to be looking at a second weekend of a movie in a long time. They're not as much as they are going to look at Barbie's grosses, because obviously the Barbenheimer meme. Is this a meme stock situation where the Barbenheimer, I mean, that was a real thing. That was something social media created. It created an event. And look, people are really liking Barbie. And it really depends. We'll see what the hold is going to be like if the phenomenon sticks around. I mean, already the movie's doing phenomenal business, probably a lot more than, and let's face it, both Oppenheimer and Barbie are doing tremendous business. A lot more than anybody could have possibly hoped for. So it could very well be if it holds. It really depends what that's going to be. Eli says, did you see the new WandaVision Physical Edition? Well, so there's a company in Asia that showed these WandaVision steelbooks. Obviously, there have not been any of the Disney Plus shows available in physical media form, because why would there be? They want you to go join Disney Plus. But this company made WandaVision boxes that don't have discs in them. Well, apparently these were made, but there was everyone saying, well, there's no physical media in them. Disney is now talking about pulling their physical media out of Asia and out of Australia entirely, which is crazy. Because if you still want to get like 3D, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, you can still get it in 3D if you buy the Japanese Blu-ray or the Japanese 4K. So it's weird. I don't know. But yeah, that WandaVision is not an officially sanctioned thing. It came from a Disney vendor. There were pictures of it, but so far it's not actually getting released. Colonel Angus says, thanks, is NGK somebody, or is that just goodnight or something? But thank you, Colonel Angus. Thanks for supporting the channel. Stephen Langford says, Oppenheimer was awesome. The film never showed Nagasaki and Hiroshima get bombed like I thought it would, considering the R rating. You know, there's been a lot of people that have wondered about that. You know, there's been a lot of people like, how can you not show the people that were affected by the bomb that they were making? And I can see the point of that, but that's not really what the movie's about. You know, I understand it's called Oppenheimer. It's not a World War II story. It doesn't show the horrors that and I think that's part of what, you know, call it the banality of evil. Call it what you want. But I think that was part of the reason behind not doing that. I mean, once you show the horrors of war, I think what's so crazy about that idea is that by showing it's a movie where scientists were in rooms, and what they were creating and what they were doing and how it literally impacted the world is not something that they were ever going to feel or be on boots on the ground. They knew they'd created this monstrous thing, but witnessing all of that firsthand, you know, they didn't. And I think that was kind of part of what Nolan was going for in terms of what the movie means. 200 Watt Studio says, I saw Sean Gunn protest Iger and Disney and Netflix, but I never saw him outside of Warner Brothers, where his brother now works. But Warner Brothers owes him his Gilmore Girls residuals. Yes, and that is true. And I understand that, but I don't think that all the studios are being picketed and protested. I don't think that just because someone owes you money doesn't mean you're not going to necessarily do business with them and or protest them. And I think that Sean Gunn wouldn't have a problem protesting in front of Warner Brothers. I don't think he would. I think everybody would understand because, like you said, Gilmore Girls is and this is the thing, again, I want to reiterate, Sean Gunn has a deal. And if he feels that Netflix is benefiting off the Gilmore Girls, he has to understand that Netflix paid probably a very princely sum as a licensing fee to Warner Brothers. So his beef about residuals is not with Netflix. It's with Warner Brothers. And that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around, but and he's not dumb. So, Nick Parris says, what's up, Rob? So first let me say Sound of Freedom is the biggest box office surprise I've ever seen. With that being said, should any studio with a big expensive film out there right now getting outgrossed by Sound of Freedom be put in the penalty box? Look, Mission Impossible is being put in the penalty box, certainly, by Sound of Freedom. I don't think it necessarily has to go that way. Look, there are surprise breakout hits. Poor Gilly's out there barking. There are surprise breakout hits all the time. And, Sound of Freedom is anomalous. Obviously, it's resonating with a lot of people. It's a story about trafficking and all that. Obviously, its subjects are controversial. I mean, that's true. I remember, was it Clint Eastwood's movie? Was it Sniper, the one with Bradley Cooper? Some people were surprised at how well that movie did. And, there are certain similarities in a way. So, yeah, I can see why the movie is doing well because of its subject matter. And then, of course, Jim Caviezel's ties to QAnon and all that. I understand why it's controversial, and they're doing interesting things like paying it forward and buying tickets and that kind of thing. I'll tell you one thing, though. I gotta say, so Angel Studios that liberated this movie from 20th Century Fox, I need to read more about this because the movie was made for 20th Century Fox during the transition between Fox and Disney. And it kind of fell into limbo land, kind of like David Pryor's movie The Empty Man almost did, but he just stuck to his guns and got it released. But it's very hard to see The Empty Man. I had to buy a bootleg Blu-ray of it off the Tuna Train, for those of you who know what the Tuna Train is, but that's where I got my copy. I'd love to see it get a real release. But so it sat there for 5 years. Can you imagine you make a movie for however much it costs and it sits on a shelf and you don't know when it's going to get released? And Angel Studios bought it from Disney to release it. Now, I don't know much about Angel Studios other than they're faith-based, obviously, Angel, and you go look into what they're doing. But they do have a movie coming out that interests me. So it's called The Shift, and it's based on a short film, which you can find on YouTube. You can go to Angel Studios and watch The Shift short film. The short film was interesting. It was more of a setup than really, I think it was a proof of concept. But if you watch, Neil McDonough stars, apparently if you watch the short, he's playing the devil. It has a really interesting, because I love movies about Satan and the devil, and just like I love movies about religious cults, bring it on. I'll watch anything with the devil in it. And watch the trailer for The Shift that comes out in December. Pretty interesting. If they're going to take faith-based films in that direction, count me in. But, I'm happy when any movie makes money. And to see something like, The Sound of Freedom make this kind of money, I mean, you have to understand that I'm looking at it as a movie with filmmakers making a movie and a Latino filmmaker having made that movie. So it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I am not getting involved. I mean, if you look, the subject of the film, The Real Guy, is very controversial, especially in his home state of Utah, and a lot of talk is about how he's overblown his own exploits. But to me, it's like, it's a movie, you know. It based on a true story, whatever. That kind of stuff doesn't bother me. Do Jim Caviezel's ties to QAnon bother me? Yeah, they do, because I've met Jim Caviezel. I moderated a panel he was on for Comicon, and I liked him quite a bit. But I understand, these views are out there. Does that bother me? Do I tie that together with the movie? Look, he's an actor. If I were interested, I cannot interest myself in the private lives and beliefs of every single actor for every single movie I watch. I'm sure half the movies I love, I completely disassociate myself from the actors and their real lives and what I'm watching on screen, rightly or wrongly. So with Jim Caviezel, and I haven't seen Sound of Freedom. I'm curious. I just have been so busy, I haven't been able to see anything in the last week. But it's interesting. Would I release another movie against it? I don't know. I just am happy people are going to the theater, man. Between Sound of Thunder, between the Barbenheimer thing, Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones still making money, people are going to see movies. It's good. It's all good. Perplexed says, what are your thoughts on the whole Seven Dwarfs controversy on the upcoming Snow White film? You know what? I can't get mad about something I haven't seen. I mean, people see these pictures of what the Seven Dwarfs are, and everyone's freaking out. I don't have an opinion because I haven't seen the movie, and so I'm not gonna get all up in arms about it. I mean, I will say this. I worked for Disney. I actually worked on the Snow White, the first DVD release. The big release. I did Disney Through the Decades for the first Snow White DVD when I worked for Curdy Pellerin. And of course, Snow White is the first Disney feature film. I think it's a beautiful movie. I love the original Snow White. I think it's actually really scary. It's the kind of kids movie I could really get behind. I liked it when I was a kid because it was so scary. I was like, it's kind of hard. I know it's funny to say this about Snow White. It's kind of hardcore. I mean, the magic mirror and the witch with the apple, and there was some scary stuff in there. It's like, we're not going to pull any punches, man. It's the 30s, man. So, what do I think about the controversy? To me, I'm going to wait and see about it. I mean, I can understand like why they would change it, but again, I feel that dwarf characters are fantasy characters anyway. And look, you know what? It's funny because I've always thought of Time Bandits, the movie Time Bandits, which of course has a whole cast of little people, as kind of being, what did the dwarves do when they, from Snow White, what did they end up? They ended up the Time Bandits. And it's funny to me, I kind of would have thought that that's what they would have done with Snow White. And if they indeed, like the picture we saw of these people, I'm like, I understand where Peter Dinklage is coming from. I tried to understand what everybody has to say and about all these things, but I'm like, we all we can do is move forward and become more sensitive and more educated, more evolved. But it's a tough one. It's tough. I mean, Snow White is what, 90? Well, okay, what was it, 37? 37? It's an old movie. It's gonna be 90 years old soon. I don't know. I hope the movie's good. I feel that way about every movie that's getting made. I hope it's good. I hope I like it. I want to like it. So Perplexed goes on to say, by the time we hit tomorrow or Thursday, Warner Brothers' own Barbie movie will make more than their Flash and Shazam 2 combined totals worldwide. Yikes. Good luck to Blue Beetle. Yeah, I mean, well, again, it's funny though. It's what can you say? I mean, I liked Shazam: Fury of the Gods, And I really liked The Flash. I really did. I enjoyed it. I like both those movies for what they were. Did they break any new ground? No, but I mean, I had fun. I had fun with both of those movies. I'll buy The Flash when it comes out. I bought the Steelbook of Fury of the Gods. I'm sorry they didn't do more business, but I thought they were fun. I did. I thought they were fun. I guess I got what I expected. And I thought Flash, for what it was pretty bonkers. And I thought Muschietti did a pretty good job with it. And, I don't have the problem that a lot of people have with visual effects, because I've been watching visual effects my whole life, and I'll go back and I'll watch Fritz Lang's Metropolis from 1927. I know I'm looking at visual effects from almost 100 years ago. That does not hamper my enjoyment for a movie. I just wish we had less of a reliance on CG. I'd love to see things done more in a more practical way. But it's crazy. Look, I think Blue Beetle unless Blue Beetle is somehow going to catch on with the Latino community in some way, shape, or form, I think, I mean, I don't know how much they spent on it, but I can't imagine Blue Beetle doing good business. It looks a little goofy for me. And for me, what's interesting is that I can't help think about I think about the Ted Kord Blue Beetle. It's Booster Gold and Ted Kord, man. It's blue and gold, from Justice League International, Justice League America, Justice League from the mid '80s. I fell in love with both of those characters in that comic. So, look, if Blue Beetle's a good movie, I hope it comes out and makes money. I really do. Yeah. Secular Monk, speaking of The Exorcist, says, I just finished To Live and Die in LA in 4K. Excellent transfer. This was a blind buy for me. Thank you for the recommendation. Well, I'd like to think, Secular Monk, I don't steer people wrong. I wouldn't tell everybody to buy every movie, but I'm a huge fan of To Live and Die in LA. To Live and Die in LA came out on November 1st, 1985, in the middle of the 80s. And to me, a lot of people said, unfortunately, it was probably just the beginning of, or maybe not. I don't know if Miami Vice had already. Let's find. You know what? I want to know now that Vice debut episode. When did it debut? I knew it was Brothers Keeper. Okay. So Miami Vice did premiere in 1984. So a lot of people thought that To Live and Die in L.A. was like a really vicious, amoral episode of Miami Vice, because Miami Vice had been out for a year. But it was based on a novel by Gerald Petovich, who is a former Secret Service officer. So it was not trying to be Miami Vice. I think To Live and Die in L.A. is one of the great movies of the mid-'80s. I think it has real bite. And, when it came out, it was people didn't like how sadistic it was and how dark it was. And I loved all of that. I was in college. I'd been in college I graduated high school in 85, and then I went to college, and I was at the Evergreen State College before I went to USC, and I drove in, 70 miles, 140 miles each way, but I had a job, so I was driving in anyway. But saw it at the King's Cinema, right across from the UA 150 on 6th and Blanchard, where I saw Close Encounters, and I loved it. I couldn't wait. William Friedkin did not let me down, and I'm glad you liked it. And that transfer, it has never looked better. The only regret, the only thing that I think is a bummer about that transfer is that I wish it was they're not going to remix that movie. So it's the 5.1 mix we've had, but it needs more bass. But it always needed more bass. It needed more bass in 1985. So I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad I didn't steer you wrong. Zachary Zabayle says, have you read the book by Rick Rubin called Creative Act? He says if you create solely for profit, then that's not true creation. Echoes what you say? Look, as the Joker said, never do something for free if you're good at it, right? No, I think being paid for creation is there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, people who make movies are so expensive, they have to be paid. But, I don't think anybody gets it. People who are artists who are driven to create are driven to create. They don't do it because of money. A lot of them would like to get paid, and you have to make a living. So I don't have a problem with that entirely. But I think that anybody who's a true creative spirit, You start when you don't have any money and you work your way up because you're going to do it anyway. Real creative people, it's a calling. So it does kind of echo what I say. I think the real creative people are creating no matter what. I'm trying to create stuff every single day. And in my life, I've barely been paid for anything I've done. So, yeah, but I think that there's something to be said for that. Culture Wars Diplomacy said, it's stupid. Disney did it. Watch it if it looks good. I don't know if you mean Snow White. I mean, I can't. Here's the thing. We live in a world now we have everyone that's looking for a voice, everyone that's looking for equality, everyone that's looking for something they've never had before, or they've had to fight tooth and nail to get. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of representation. I'm a big fan of people being seen. I'm a big fan of having voices of especially filmmakers, new filmmakers I haven't heard before, who have movies and stories to tell that I don't know. I'm a big fan of that. The problem is, I don't like the fact that we're trying to pretend that the last thousands of years of humanity didn't exist, that like all of a sudden we're going to be enlightened and we're only going to tell enlightened stories. I think that's very weird. And I don't understand why people think that, well, I'm here now and I want the world to be exactly the way it should be. I'm like, who fucking died and made you king or queen or whatever you call yourself now? I mean, I don't think that's fair. And I think that is a ridiculous expectation. And I think people need to understand their history. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know any of their history. They only know one part of history, and that's what they're demanding. They're demanding something based on an ill-informed opinion because they don't know the entirety of whatever it is that they're mad about. And I think that's unfortunate. But I do think that, we live in a time where we should be more open-minded and more look out for people that haven't had people look out for them in the past. But on the other hand, I also think that people are putting their ideology, like, I don't like the fact that just because you believe in something, your belief should not extend to me. If you expect me to believe what you believe, you got to earn my respect. You've got to you can't just tell me I have to believe something or I have to think something or I have to use certain words. Don't tell me what I'm supposed to do. If you want me to respect you and you want me to call you by a certain name, or happy to do it, but you have to earn that first. And I think that's where we're at right now. There's all these people demanding these things of everybody, and people are like, why should I do this? Why do you suddenly get to dictate terms? Well, because I've been downtrodden for so long. I don't care. I think that's what a lot of people are saying. Lots of people are downtrodden. There's been people downtrodden throughout history, and they've all had to work their way up. They've all had to fight their own battles. And I think that's where we're at now, and I'm perfectly willing, mostly because I like people. I like all kinds of people. And frankly, the weirder people are, the more I tend to like them. So any shape, size, color, creed, sexuality, you name it, I'll like you. But I don't expect anybody else will. And I do think that everything has to be earned. And I think right now, that's why I'm saying, I always say the Burnett axiom, don't put your universe, don't put your agenda before your characters and your stories. You have to allow your characters and your stories to be true to themselves. And if you start injecting them with, we got to make this about the whole universe, or you start taking your own political ideology, if it's not baked into the story you're telling, or it's not part of the conception of your original character, that you're going to put this, you're not going to do the story any favors or your audience any favors. So, but I do think what I do like, to be honest, is I do like how open our society is becoming to discussing things that are difficult to discuss. You know me, my unless we can talk to each other, and that's the real problem, is people can't talk to each other, they're not listening to one another, they're only hearing one thing. I really think that what our civilization now needs more than ever is we need to be able to listen to other people when they speak, and those other people have to be able to answer our questions without getting all freaked out and triggered. We need to learn how to converse. I don't know why people stopped understanding how to do that, but they seem to have. And what we need to do is be able to talk to each other and listen. Most importantly, listen to what other people are saying. So, Murray Ryke says, now in hindsight, do you think it was a mistake for Paramount to release Mission Impossible 7 a week before Barbenheimer due to its close proximity to each other and the limited IMAX and high format availability? If yes, where would you have put it? Good question, Murray. You know what? I probably would have moved it. I would have moved it deeper, maybe into August. Once Tom Cruise, obviously Oppenheimer booked those theaters way in advance, I would have deferred to Christopher Nolan. I mean, if you look at these IMAX theaters, they're sold out for weeks. You can't get a ticket here in Los Angeles, the greater Southern California area, at any IMAX or 70mm screening, which is great for the format. But I would have waited. I would have waited. I understand they want to make it a big summer movie, but that film has been irrevocably hurt, which is a bummer. Tom Jr. Jackson says, Bobby B, I've been watching documentaries and some good indie movies on Paramount Plus. Highly recommend the Belushi doc on Paramount Plus. Ooh, I'd like to watch that. Ray Valero just sends in a super chat. Thanks, Ray. I appreciate that. Yeah, Tom, I mean, I love those documentaries. I'll watch that Belushi documentary. Captivated by Lexi. Who's Lexi? Trying to remember a late 1980s movie that takes place in a single night at a hotel or an estate. It's a psychological thriller that depicts members of a get-together being stalked by a killer. Well, that's a little generic for me. A late 80s movie that takes place in a single night. Well, you know what? I mean, right now there's so many things I could say, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to let's see. I'm going to see if I can figure this out for you, just by putting this on the internet, and see what comes up, if anything does come up, because I have too many windows open, so it's not letting me use this window. Here, let me close some of the windows, and maybe I can figure it out. But right off the bat, it doesn't. There's so many things. By the way, do you know, this is something interesting about the SAG? Dustin Nelson writes this in Entertainment Weekly. This is amazing. Harrison Ford's Stunt-Double lights self on fire during a SAG-AFTRA rally. Tired of being burned by the AMPTP. You gotta love that. Stunt performers rallied in Georgia, this was today, to support the SAG-AFTRA strike, and one went up in flames. That's amazing. Stunt coordinator and Indiana Jones' very own stunt double Mike Massa stole the show, striding across the stage in flames while holding a SAG-AFTRA on strike sign. We are tired of being burned by the AMPTP, read one caption, shared with a video of Massa in flames. You go. It's on Instagram. I would check that out. That's truly amazing. Oh, my God. Oh, you got to look this up. It's under the Elena Sanchez and Mike Massa 1X. That's pretty crazy. And he stops to talk while he's on fire. Man, oh, man. Wow, that's I got to check that out. Boy, you know what? I was looking for something for your movie, but I got a bunch of different things. I'd have to go to Chat GPT or something. But I don't know what that would be, that late 80s movie. Collider has a list of the 10 best movies that take place over one night. Let's see what they say. Good Time. Before Sunrise. That's not what you're looking for. Attack the Block. That's from 2011. Not the same thing. Night of the Living Dead. Not a bad one. Mikey and Nikki, that's 76. The Warriors, 79, which everybody should see because it was one of the greatest movies ever made. After Hours, but that's not. Die Hard, that's not good. Evil Dead, okay. Yeah. Halloween. It doesn't really help you, though. I don't know what it would be from the late 80s. And I'm maybe, you know what, I'm going to go off this stream and I'm going to be like, oh, I know what it was. So, captivated by Lexi. I hope Lexi's able to captivate you and help you figure out what the answer to this is. Zachary Zabayle, without naming names, tell us all about a despicable individual you'll never work with again and why. What happened? Or give us the goods about scum you've met. Well, Zachary, I can't really do that. I will tell you this, though. There's a guy named Alec Peters who I did a lot of good work for that has accused me of stealing, accused me of many number of things on a Star Trek fan film called Axanar. I will never work with him again. Here I did all this work for him for 3.5 years, and he turned into a monumental douche. But, and he's been in so many lawsuits with so many people. He's tried to sue me twice. He sued me in Georgia. I've never worked in Georgia. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I beat it, by the way, because he had no evidence. But, yeah. And I'll tell you something. It's you know, there's so many douchebags in the entertainment business, and you just have to steer clear of them. But, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go out in public, though. I wouldn't want airing dirty laundry in public is never. I don't know why people do it. It's never a good thing, and now people, you never get a fair shake in the public sphere anyway. Is it Ray Pisty? I don't know if it's Pisty. Peisty? Is it Peisty? I don't know. Or just Peist? So is Dune 2 really being delayed to 2024, or is it being released in time? After dealing with the ramifications of COVID, we now have to deal with the SAG-AFTRA crap. Well, Ray, this is a very good question. Sorry if I got your last name wrong. They are talking now because they need... Part of the marketing of any movie is to have the actors go out on the talk show circuit to talk about their movies. And if they don't have that, that's a big deal for film. And if they can't do that, it means it could be pretty detrimental to the marketing of a movie. So if the strike is going to drag on, and it very well could, don't be surprised if these big budget Killers of the Flower Moon might get pushed even. I mean, everything, because these are all movies that they're not inexpensive, so they need that marketing. And it would be bad. I honestly, I hope it doesn't happen. Listen, you guys, I have another article that I really wanted to read, and it was an article that I had read that I wanted to share with you, which was actually the whole reason to do this stream. And it was a stream that came out right. It came out during Comicon on Friday. It came out on Friday, and I wanted to share the article. So if you don't mind, if you're going to stick around, I would love to. And we can get back to super chats and stuff. But I wanted to share this article with you because it was in the LA Times. It was written by Brian Merchant, July 21st, 2023. Hollywood is on strike because CELs fell for Silicon Valley's magical thinking. Now, the reason that I've been talking a lot about that, about how, with the way Wall Street runs and with the way big tech runs, everybody wants to see growth. All this staggering growth. Everyone's talking about, we want to see more households. Well, eventually, the problem with the streaming realm is ultimately there's only so many households on the planet. Now, there might be, 4 billion or something. We have to get to those at some point. But it is a finite resource. And of all the people on the planet, first of all, how many people are even capable of streaming? There's a lot of places we think now that they have internet everywhere, but they don't. So people that can even afford streaming or people that have the equipment to stream on. So this idea that you're going to have massive growth, to me, was always something sort of silly. I always thought that the great thing about streamers as far as a studio is concerned is theoretically, so let's say you have HBO Max, and for the sake of argument, let's say HBO Max has 100 million subscribers, and it's Warner Discovery, HBO Max, or HBO Max, whatever, call it what you want, but they have 100 million subscribers, which means that, let's just say for the sake of argument, that every month they're getting a $10. They're making $1 billion. If it's $20, $2 billion a month. $2 billion a month in cash flow. For a movie studio, that's really good. That is a basis. If it was $20, you'd have a $20 billion revenue stream that's basically coming to you. Now you have the operating costs of having to run everything and licensing fees and making whatever programming you're going to make and all that. But that is something that studios didn't really have before. You didn't have that revenue stream coming to you. You were always licensing your material out to cable providers or somebody else. But if it's coming directly to you, well, that allows you to have some kind of economic stability that you didn't have before. And I think that's what the benefit was to all of this. But then everyone is overspending and all of their streaming services are in debt. So, and already because of the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, there's a $50 billion, there's more than $50 billion in debt at Warner Brothers. So they have to make up, where's that money going to come from? How are they going to make that up? So they have to do that. But theoretically, if you didn't have debt, that's a nice revenue stream. And if you keep it strong and steady on a monthly basis and you don't have people, going to another streaming service, you don't have that churn. If you can just keep people there, well, that's a good basis to then work on the other facets of your business, like theatrical or whatever else you're going to do. But that's not how Wall Street works right now. So I wanted to read this article. Hollywood is on strike because CEOs fell for Silicon Valley's magical thinking. It's by Brian Merchant. It was published Friday, July 21st. In one respect, the actors and writers of Hollywood uniting on the picket lines in a historic industry-shaking strike is as tale as old as time. One of the workers fighting bosses for better pay. The reason this battle is shaping up to be so uniquely intractable and momentous, as you might have gathered from all the headlines about artificial intelligence and streaming economics, is very much of our moment. But it's not ultimately technology that's at the root of the problem. It's that the studio executives, both new and old, have embraced the powerful and ultimately disastrous magical thinking pumped out by Silicon Valley for the last 10 years. Studio heads are touting the disruptive properties of digital streaming, the transformative power of AI, a brave, unpredictable new world for entertainment writ large, and how writers and actors must adapt to this new future. But just as it did when it was issuing from the tech sector during the 2010s, this talk too often amounts to a smokescreen that lets executives and investors line their pockets and risks leaving workers holding the bag. These companies blew up successful business model that the public enjoyed, that was immensely profitable, and they replaced it with the mishmash that we have now, says Adam Conover, the star of Adam Ruins Everything, and a negotiating committee member of the Writers Guild of America, tells me. And now they're refusing to update the contract to reflect those changes. We've heard a lot about the ways that studios want to reserve the right to use AI, to create endlessly usable digital replicas of actors, to generate scripts that writers will be paid lower rates to fix up. We've also heard about the new economic picture ushered in by streaming, about an industry in the throes of change and the necessity of belt-tightening as a result. We've heard Disney chief executive Bob Iger saying the demand by the Screen Actors Guild for fair payment in the new digital landscape isn't realistic, and heard how Netflix saw declining user signups and stock prices last year. Yet Iger reportedly makes $27 million a year, while Netflix just raked in a $1.5 billion in net profit from the last quarter. So what's really going on here, and how did we get here? I would also like to point out, and it sounds like I'm speaking in the studio's defense, I'm not. Bob Iger is paid what he's paid because he controls all of Disney. Their theme parks, their cruise ship lines, all of that stuff. He gets paid what he gets paid because the shareholders and the board thinks that's what he's worth. His fees have nothing at all to do with the actors or the writers, even though they're trying to conflate that he does. That's a totally different thing. Now, if you want to talk about corporate overlords and how much they're making more than their workers, that's a whole different story, and I don't disagree. I'm just saying that Bob Iger, he got what he deserved, and because he got it, because he negotiated it. And, I don't begrudge anybody for that. And it just, again, it doesn't have anything to do with what SAG, take Bob Iger's salary and put it aside. Because that's just something they're conflating. Anyway. So what's really going on here? And how do we get here? First, we need to understand why the 2010s may well come to be remembered as the great decade of magical thinking for Silicon Valley. Drunk on a truly transformational first decade of the 21st century, one that saw Google, Amazon, the iPhone, and social media storm the world stage, flush tech investors turn their sights toward the next generation of startups, eager to see them do the same. The formula for seeking out that next multi-billion-dollar unicorn in hindsight was pretty simple. The next wave of startups had to promise that it would disrupt a stale industry with a newer, high-tech, app-driven alternative, promise the potential for vast scale, and promise that it could do it fast. We saw the rise of Uber and Lyft, each of which vowed to revolutionize transit, and we got the likes of WeWork, which set out to usher in the future of co-working, and Theranos, which would do the same for at-home blood testing. We know how it ended. Uber and Lyft have never been sustainably profitable. WeWork collapsed dramatically when it became clear that it was merely a wildly over-leveraged real estate company, and Theranos' futuristic medical technology was outright fraudulent. Unlike many of the 21st century's first-wave tech companies and products, which found both markets and roads to profitability, these were pipe dreams, popped up by a fire hose of investment cash, big talking founders, and the very real and at the same time quite understandable sense that Silicon Valley was the place that determined how the future was made. As the 2010s began, Netflix sat somewhere between the old guard and the new. It introduced online streaming in 2007 and had a real product with real demand, as well as an established business in its DVD by mail rental service. Yet its ambitions were hypercharged by a newfangled sense that it could disrupt the old-school Hollywood industry and scale endlessly. There was no reason anyone in the world with access to a screen couldn't subscribe. Big-name investors sank hundreds of millions into Netflix's new vision. As it began producing original content in 2013, it applied a distinctly next-wave Silicon Valley ethos. It would make massive upfront investments, bankrolling huge productions such as the David Fincher-helmed Kevin Spacey starring House of Cards, elbowing its way into the prestige TV pack, promising not only to compete, but also to do it better. It would offer all the episodes at once, on demand, and viewers could consume them whenever and however they wanted. Cable would become obsolete, and the future was cutting the cord. As with Uber and Lyft, whose bottomless chests of venture capital allowed them to conquer new markets once dominated by stodgy old competitors, in their case the taxi cartels and livery cab companies, price was no object. Right out of the gate, episodes for original Netflix shows such as House of Cards and Orange is the New Black cost $4 million a pop. So did episodes of shows that few remember today, such as Hemlock Grove. I watched that show. The spending was profligate. It soon rose to rates of $15 billion a year on new content. But, as it did for the Magical Valley startups, the strategy worked. What happens is Netflix becomes the Wall Street darling, and all these other companies like Amazon, Disney, Apple, HBO, Paramount, and NBC race to adopt Netflix's business model, Conover says. Herein lies the trouble. Amid this boom, which for a few years ushered in a gold rush for writers and talent, Netflix adopted another key ingredient of Silicon Valley's approach: secrecy. Data about shows' performance and viewer habits were kept proprietary. We knew only what the streamers wanted us to know. That went for customers, performers, writers, and for investors. Streaming is an inscrutable black box about which so many stories might be told. It's a sticking point in the negotiations. Actors and writers on streaming series want a better way to calculate the value of their work, given that the residuals they earn are so much lower than that for network or cable shows. The studios have resisted. The reason nobody really wants to open the books on this is because Wall Street got a look, one Hollywood insider told New York Magazine. If Wall Street got a look, they'd have a collective stroke. Yeah, because there's not all the money that they think is there. What we're seeing now is the fantastical thinking that Netflix and its followers would continue endless expansion, running up against the physics of the real world. There are now 238 million Netflix subscribers. But those numbers dropped for the first time last year, and the company had to claw them back by nibbling at the corners, cutting off password sharing and launching new, cheaper tiers that run ads. The boom times are over. Executives know it, Wall Street knows it, and the story that we're in a revolutionary moment of technological transformation will run out of gas soon. So the bosses are using that moment to do what Silicon Valley wound up doing when its other big swings didn't pan out. You squeeze the labor. And I have to say, this is true across the board, and it has been for decades. The biggest expense on all of these projects is people. So what's the first thing to go? The actual talent that makes all this stuff. Let's squeeze them. They're the easiest thing to squeeze, after all, even though they're really the hardest thing to squeeze. But on paper, they're the easiest thing. Because people, you can get them to take less money. And that's what's going on here. The problem is that old adage, you can have it fast, but you can't have it cheap. You can't have it, if it's cheap, it's not going to be good. You can have one of those two things of the three or something. Just as Uber and Lyft, which promised drivers rich rewards and flexible fares, started reducing rates and making it harder to earn those rewards, Netflix and the streaming cohort cut in its mold are now trying to square their promises of world conquest by slashing worker pay under the fog of magical thinking. It's been noted, and correctly so, that entertainment industry labor disputes often erupt when there's a change in technology, from theaters screening projected films to the cathode ray tube of home television, or say the rise of YouTube and other online content in the 2000s, and that happens for a reason. Historically, executives and management use a disorienting new technology to try and justify lowering wages of their workers, as they have done since the days of the Industrial Revolution. The old CEOs knew that they had to work with the unions, bargain with us, Conover says. The new ones don't. So part of the point of the strike is as labor showing the tech CEOs that no, you actually have to deal fairly with unions. Conover notes that it's jarring to see the streamers plead poverty as an excuse not to negotiate with talent in good faith, given that show budgets and profits have both gone up. Netflix lied to the public in Wall Street, he says, telling them you can watch every show ever made in perpetuity with no ads for $15.99 a month forever. That's like MoviePass, the much hyped app that allowed users to see unlimited movies for a monthly fee before quickly going bankrupt. That's ludicrous. Ludicrous if you want to pay the people who actually create those shows for you. What Netflix and the streamers are trying to do now is seal in a new standard under which writers and actors are treated in much the way that Uber and the gig app companies treat their independent contractor drivers. Uber's a perfect example, Conover says. Its drivers need to supply their own cars, their own gas, their own insurance, and so on. The drivers are on their own, with few to no benefits or protections, and are expected to maximize profits for the company. And Netflix is trying to do the same thing. Unlike Uber, Netflix really is quite profitable, but in order to sustain the mythical levels of growth it has promised investors, it's turning to similar tactics, cutting workers' hours, making work more precarious and unpredictable, and reducing pay. It's a far cry from the sleek, automated futures promised by the studio executives. As with the biggest companies of Silicon Valley's magical thinking era, it's often hard to parse whether the ones touting the game-changing technologies themselves even believe in these visions. Do studio execs really think consumers want to watch a parade of digital replicas of their favorite actors parroting lines from AI-generated scripts? Or are they simply aware that the mere threat of such a future gives them leverage and power over the workers of today? Listen, I have a theory about this, and I can't prove this, but as somebody that's loved movies my whole life, I think part of the appeal of watching motion pictures and television, part of the reason we become as invested as we do in movies and TV is because we know that we're watching real people. We know that we're watching human beings performing in front of us, actors saying lines that were written to them. We know there's directors and cinematographers. We may not be conscious of it all the time, but the reason that we're attracted to that kind of storytelling is because we know that we're watching real human beings. Now, I would say that somebody's going to say to me, but Rob, The Last of Us, I played that game. I played The Last of Us 2. I was so involved, and those aren't real people. That's true. But you're also very aware that you're playing a video game. And I think ultimately that we might not even know why. It might not even be something. I just can't imagine that if we do, and let me be very clear about this. I do believe in 20 years, probably less. We'll all be able to use digital technology, and you'll be able to call up a movie. Name any subject you want. I want a romantic comedy set in the 14th century about a priest falling in love with a princess. And you want it to star Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart. And you can pick anybody else you want. And John Williams is going to do the score, and it's going to look like a David Fincher movie or a Kubrick movie, or it's going to look like The Adventures of Robin Hood. And you'll be able to hit a button, and they will kick you out that movie that you've designed. You can sit there after 20 minutes it took to render it, or probably faster. You'll be able to watch the movie that you came up with. But the thing is, I think at the end of the day, that might be a really interesting gimmick at first, but ultimately, it's not going to resonate, because no matter how good AI gets, all it's ever going to be able to do, until the singularity happens and you have a sentient machine that can think and literally feel, but it won't know what the heat of a sunset is like, or the sunrise for that matter. And I do think we'll reject it. We might not even know why, but we'll feel it's not right. But at the same time, I also believe that this kind of drama that we love now is not going to be the preeminent form of entertainment in the 21st century moving forward past the 2030s. I think that we're at a place with gaming and virtual technology right now that film was in about 1924, right before the advent of sound. And sure, you had people like Murnau doing cool things. You had movies like Sunrise that were amazing. You had Metropolis that were amazing. But then sound came in and changed everything. And I think that's where we're at with digital technology and interactive technology. We're barely scratching the surface, but there's going to be a monster change that's going to happen. I don't know what that change is going to be, but it's going to be there. So this article goes on to say, in the end, the answer is immaterial. Silicon Valley's invasion of Hollywood brought with it science-fictional notions of growth for the industry, a penchant for secrecy and unaccountability, and the expectation that it could get away with treating workers like robots or invisible code. We're seeing what happens when those notions meet, for one of the first times, with a powerful, organized resistance. Personally, I'm hoping this one gets a Hollywood ending, and not the ending so many Silicon Valley startups have got over the last 10 years. And that comes to us from Bryant Merchant. He's the Los Angeles Times technology columnist. And so that's why, ultimately, I believe in writers, and I believe in the actors. I love both writers and actors, and I want to see great programming. If you look at both the Emmy lists for the Best Series Comedy and Best Series Drama, I can't remember a list of stronger candidates. Those are all about the writing, man. Both the drama and the comedy. It's all incredible writers, incredible showrunners, incredible actors that brought these together. Look at those lists. And if you ever wondered whether or not, or how important great writers, great directors, great showrunners are, look no further than the Emmy-nominated shows in both comedy and dramas this year, because it is bangers all. And I wouldn't want to lose those people. I am so glad we have the diversity of storytelling, the kinds of stories all across the gamut of dramas, comedies, 1 hours, half hours, limited shows, amazing stuff. So, yeah, it's crazy stuff. Sonny Dominguez says, Rob, have you eaten? I did eat today. Elizabeth made me a turkey sandwich, which was delightful. And then she went to see a play, and I came and did this stream. Does an after hours basically happen over one day? It does. Yes, it does. It happens over one day. Which, by the way, I just got on 4K from Criterion. Scott Bartholomew says, I enjoyed your short clip earlier today talking about working with Shatner. Well, thank you, sir. I did. I there's a clip I put up. It's from an old Robservations back in the 100s. I don't know, like 163 or 143 or something. And I've been going through my old, because there's so many people that they don't delve into that stuff. I thought I'd take the the stuff that was worth sharing kind of updated a bit and put it up on the channel so more people would see it. Maybe generate some more eyeballs and views or something. Who knows? But I was working on my 10 and 20, and I thought that'd be fun to put up. So I'm glad you liked it. So check that out. It's a story. It's an important lesson I learned about working with actors from William Shatner himself while we were working together the very first day we worked together on Free Enterprise. Sean Hoover says, AI is now the driver of innovation in tech and beyond. Netflix just posted AI jobs paying up to $900,000 a year. The future's AI. Get ready. It's unstoppable. You're right. You're absolutely right. But I think it's going to be working in tandem with people. But yeah, but again, even I've used ChatGPT to write stuff. I have to rewrite everything. You can't use it to write reviews, really. I have to go in and change everything. But yeah. Scott Bartholomew says ChatGPT will save Trek because the current writers are not with crap. But I don't think so. I think like somebody said, you could use ChatGPT to turn out a first draft, but I don't know, man. I don't know how long how worthwhile it's going to be. Well, listen, everybody. I got to the end of what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to do the show. I wanted to thank you all for coming along with me on a late show tonight. I thought it was a lot of fun. And let me just look, Sean. Irene Jobson's been a member for 9 months. But I want to thank everybody for joining me. I will be back tomorrow. There'll be another Architects. If you guys like video games, I wish more people would watch Architects of Imagination. If you're interested, DJ does such a great job. And we're getting these heavy hitters in the video game industry. And not many people watch the show. I know YouTube analytics and all that. But I'm proud to have it on. It's some really good stuff, so check it out. Lana Ewan dropped another review for Autopsy of Jane Doe today. Check that out. Is doing a lot of stuff on the channel that's good. So I'll be back with Robservations tomorrow and all that. So check out that. I don't know what Robservations is going to be about. And Josh, I understand that this was Robservations episode number 870, and there's already 871, but I had to fill in that number, right, buddy? Don't let your OCD freak you out. It's okay. And it is truly 870. And on that note, I want to thank everybody for generously supporting the chat, or in the chat, supporting the channel via Superchats and tips. Thank you so much. I want to say that Tom Jr. Jackson has been a great moderator, is always a great moderator, and we're lucky to have him around these parts. And Brian Hepburn was here, too. So, Brian, thank you for being here. And let's say I don't think I see anybody else, but thank you for moderating. And on that note, I'm going to end Robservations episode number 870 and say this. Remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And go see Barbenheimer. I'm going to do that. And as all things, I would say, have a better night. And we'll see you tomorrow.